Hello, and welcome to another Manna. I'm Jeff Glenn. I'm a pastor here at Lighthouse, and it's my pleasure to take you through the Word each week. We've been going through Genesis, and today we'll be taking a look at chapter 40. This is right at the beginning, middle part of Joseph's story. And so since we're in chapter 40, a good place to read from is chapter 37. So in chapter 37, 5 gives us some really great context for chapter 40. And chapter 37, 5 reads, "Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more." So if you were with us when we went through chapter 37, we know that there was sibling rivalry, and what that whole incident with the dreams, what that brought about for Joseph was his brothers hated him even more. And so now we flash forward to chapter 40, and he served in Potiphar's house, where Potiphar's wife accused him of trying to sleep with him, or basically trying to rape her. Potiphar gets angry and throws him into the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh's prison. Now, this wasn't just an ordinary prison, because as we'll see here when we meet a couple of the characters in chapter 40, and if you've already read ahead, which I recommend, then you already know we're going to be talking about the baker and the cupbearer. Depending on the version, New King James calls him the butler, but essentially it's the one who brings the wine for the king. And so we know that if it says butler in your version, it's the cupbearer. It's the one who's closest to the king, who brings him the pre-tested food to make sure that it's not poisoned. And then the baker is the one, it says here that the chief baker and the chief butler. So these are those who are most close to the king, or to Pharaoh. And so they're being thrown into prison with Joseph. And so this isn't an ordinary prison. And we know from chapter 39, the very end, that the keeper of the prison had put Joseph in charge of the affairs of the prisoners, making sure that they were taken care of, essentially, that they had their supplies and food and all of the rest, and that he was so well trusted that the keeper of the prison didn't follow up or keep tabs on Joseph. He trusted Joseph to be able to take care of what needed to be taken care of. And so we bring ourselves into chapter 40 with the butler and the baker, who've somehow, for some reason, angered Pharaoh. And we're not told why, and we're not even told if it was legitimate, even through the rest of the story here in chapter 40. We just know that Pharaoh was mad at him, and so he threw him in prison. And Joseph is placed over their care as well as the other prisoners, and so he's taking care of them. And we know by reading the story that they each had a dream on the same night, and they were bummed out by the dream because they didn't know what their dreams meant. They were troubled by them, and Joseph, seeing them being bummed out, asks them, "Hey, what's going on?" And they say, "Hey, we've had these dreams, and we don't know what they mean." And this brings us to one of the things that's encouraging for us, because in this moment, in verse 8, it says, "And they said to him, 'We have each had a dream, and there is no interpreter.' So Joseph said to them, 'Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please.'" And so this carries all the way back to when Joseph had his first dream. He knew that came from God, and he knew the interpretation came from God as well. So Joseph isn't trying to take credit for having learned how to interpret dreams. No, he's giving that credit to God, and we'll see that will serve him well later on as well. And so he interprets the butler. The butler has a dream about 3 vines of grapes and crushing them and giving them to Pharaoh. And Joseph interprets that dream as the 3 vines are 3 days, and that he will be restored to being the cupbearer for the king. And similarly, the baker has a dream about 3 baskets of baked goods on top of his head, which Joseph interprets as the 3 days for the baskets. And the fact that there's birds eating out of the baskets means that he will not find favor with Pharaoh, but he'll be lifted up. And so in both of these, we see that the The cupbearer, he'll be lifted up back to a place of prominence, and the baker, his head will be lifted up. His head will be taken from him. And so a lifting up is a part of this theme of this story. One of the other themes that we see running through here is the third day, or 3 days, being very much prominent in this dream. And we can kind of think New Testament here, 3 days, on the third day, and all of the rest. And so Joseph, he's imprisoned unjustly, but God is still with him. And what we find here is that at the end of the 3 days, indeed, the cupbearer and the baker both have their dream fulfilled, in that the cupbearer was restored to the king's service, and the baker was lifted, his head was lifted up, and he was killed. But we find Joseph in prison, having this dream from many, many years ago, that he would have his family worship him, that he would remember the sheaves and all the rest in chapter 37. So Joseph, not only does these dreams and their interpretations, and Joseph's giving that to the baker and the butler, it gives him a certain amount of credibility in chapter 41 and beyond, when we see the Pharaoh's having some dreams. We'll get there next week. But it also gives Joseph credibility. It gives him that hope that his dream will be fulfilled. So if these two dreams were fulfilled in his sight, then he can also hold on to that hope that even though he's in a tough spot right now, kind of going from bad to worse, he's in a prison after all, but that his position, he will also be lifted up. Now, it would take some time, and we'll get there. But in this, the fulfillment of these dreams and us reading through them, it should also be a comfort and an encouragement to us. So as we see our circumstances in life are maybe not quite what we would want them to be, or maybe we have been through some times where, as Joseph did, he had people act maliciously towards him. Maybe we found ourselves in a similar situation, and maybe we're just know that there's a dream or a promise for us that the Lord has that hasn't been fulfilled yet, that we can hold on to it like Joseph can, that it will be fulfilled. But for each one of us, right, a non-believer and a believer, for the non-believer, we have the hope and the promise that if we turn to Jesus and confess him as Lord, that we will be saved, that when we're lifted up, we'll be lifted up to eternal life rather than being lifted up to the judgment. And as believers, we know that those promises that the Lord has for us to spend eternity with him also will be fulfilled. And so I hope that's very encouraging for you today. Until next week, stay in the Word and stay encouraged. So bless you.